Okay, hi. I'm not a professional speaker like everybody else that's spoken this morning, so you'll have to bear with me. But basically, Asper has asked me to come along today and share our journey from diagnosis to now. So just to introduce myself, my name is Amy, and I am mum of this amazing guy, Sebastian, who is actually here today, sat in the front row. This is our story of, I'm getting emotional, of Seb's ACC journey. I know all of you will relate to this. So, right at the very beginning, we were undiagnosed during pregnancy. We've had speakers this morning that have said that usually ACC is diagnosed during that 20-week scan. We actually didn't get a diagnosis during pregnancy. But when Sebastian was born, you get that mummy feeling in your tummy when something isn't quite right. And I noticed that Sebastian wasn't tracking. I was breastfeeding, and he wasn't making any eye contact, and just had that feeling, that something isn't quite right. And at around 6 weeks old, we actually noticed that he had a little bit of swelling on his forehead, and that prompted us to go to A&E for him to be checked out. And it was at that stage that a CT scan was then performed that confirmed that there was a brain abnormality. And later that day, we had an emergency MRI scan that confirmed completogenesis of the corpus callosum. So at that time, the prognosis was really uncertain. We were told that Sebastian may never walk or talk, or we were told that he could potentially be quite high functioning. The first referral that was made for us was to the eye unit. And we did get confirmation that Sebastian was in fact blind, and we had no idea at that stage as to whether or not his vision would develop. However, being the determined mummy that I am, I did everything in my power to stimulate the vision. And I knew that really high contrast, black and white, was really important to stimulate the vision at an early stage. So we spent hours upon hours looking at black and white books, looking at black and white imagery, and over time started introducing more high contrast colours like red and yellow. And at around 12 months old, Sebastian was discharged from the eye unit, and his vision has been absolutely fine ever since. And we have no idea why Sebastian was blind when he was born, but there possibly is a link to do with the fact that maybe the connections in the brain weren't quite there, and they just needed a little bit longer to develop. Another thing that I knew was particularly important from a really young age was to try and do everything we possibly could to try and strengthen the connections between the left and right hand side of his brain, so between those two hemispheres. And I wanted to do as much as I could to promote the crossing of the middle line. So for those of you that might not be aware, if you imagine drawing a line down the middle of your body, when we talk about crossing the middle line, it's any activity that promotes your arm or leg movements moving over from one hemisphere to another. So, you probably don't remember this, Sebastian, but at every single nappy change we did, we had the motion of one right arm to left leg, and we were doing this 10 times, and then the other side 10 times, and that just became habit for us. And then as months went past, we started progressing on to passing objects from one hand to another. Anything that we could do to like I said, cross the middle line. I noticed, the first thing I probably noticed in terms of delay for Sebastian was with his crawling. And I actually remember having Sebastian in like a baby carrier harness and almost demonstrating the concept of crawling, because that motion of one arm and the other arm and the other arm and the other arm is so dependent on that connection between the brain. And so I spent weeks after weeks role modelling that motion for him. And in time, he was crawling. And at that point, I acknowledged that Sebastian was going to be able to learn absolutely anything that he wants to. We just needed to find different ways of presenting and teaching those new concepts to Sebastian, because things weren't going to come as naturally to him as they might do with the neurotypical child. So, during the first 2 years of Sebastian's life, it felt like we spent more time in hospital than on playdates. We've been involved in genetics testing, which confirmed that Sebastian's ACC was in fact isolated, so there's no other conditions that have been identified. We've been part of the 100,000 Genome project, which some people might be aware of, that is specifically for children with rare conditions. Multiple MRI scans, therapies and checkups, as I'm sure a lot of you in the room today can sympathise with. Now, we were always informed that due to Sebastian's ACC, that there was a much higher chance that he would have seizures. We heard from one of the doctors this morning explaining about those infantile spasms. And we thought that we'd had a lucky escape until around 18 months of age. Sebastian had his first seizure, and following multiple tests and multiple seizures, he received a clinical diagnosis of epilepsy at 2 years of age. So Sebastian's epilepsy is currently controlled by medication, but he does still have near to constant epileptic activity in his brain. And you would have seen in the presentation this morning the side effects and the impacts that will have on your learning and development. So it was at around about that time, around about 2 years of age, that we spent some time researching what help is out there, because we were feeling very, very alone, very, very isolated, and starting to face some challenges with Sebastian in terms of behaviour and social interactions. And as he sort of transitioned into that preschool year, we wanted to make sure that we could support him in the best possible way that we could. And there just seemed to be a real lack of knowledge and understanding. We'd speak to doctors and hospital staff and they're like, we've never heard of this. I thought there must be someone in the UK that has done. So started researching and actually on Facebook came across Corpal. And that for us as a family has been an absolute game changer. They have been such a massive part of our journey. I don't think Sebastian would be where he is today without the support and guidance from the charity. And to have people that just got it, I can see lots of parents nodding. People that can empathise, people that understood. I remember countless evenings, as I am now, a blubbering wreck. These are happy, I'm so proud of our journey, and that's where the emotion is coming from. But, countless evenings on the phone to Asper, with lots of support and guidance, and I will forever be grateful for that support, so thank you. Okay, so on the screen now are a list of things that Sebastian continues to have to work really, really hard to learn and develop his skills in. These things don't come as naturally. These are really challenging things that we've noticed. And over the years, we've had countless professionals involved in Sebastian's care that we've had to push for, we've had to fight for, and it is mentally exhausting. But you will get there, and they do make a difference. We've had educational psychologists, occupational therapists, community paediatricians, emotional literacy support advisors, speech and language therapists, behaviour specialists, just to name a few. One of the things that we really quickly learned as a family is that the abstract concepts were particularly challenging for Sebastian, and we've learned that that's quite common for children with disorders of the corpus callosum. An example of that is when Sebastian was at preschool, he was really struggling to learn his colours. Well, I was thinking, how can I help him learn his colours? So I actually created some flashcards, and we had to associate a colour with an object so that he had that concrete representation, okay? So we learn red is for apple, blue is for butterfly. In time, you can look at a picture and say, it's a butterfly. It's a t-shirt, but it's a blue t-shirt. And then in time, once he had been able to link that concept together, he was then able to recognise the difference between all of the various colours. Everything has to be concrete. I think everybody, even in Karima's talk earlier, particularly around the maths problems, everything has to be concrete for children with disorders of the corpus callosum. So, September 2019, Sebastian graduated from preschool and he started primary school. And then I'm sure you'll all remember that in December of that year, the lovely COVID hit. That could have been advantageous for us in a way, because during his reception year, Sebastian was homeschooled one-to-one because schools were closed. And at the end of reception, he defied all odds. He was meeting all of his targets and hitting all of his milestones at school. In year one, the COVID restrictions were still in place, so he was partly homeschooled by his amazing dad who was off work, combined with being at school, but in the very, very small key worker groups. I don't know if those of you remember small groups. Again, Sebastian thrived in that environment, and at the end of year one, he continued to reach all of his milestones and maintain his development in line with the curriculum. It wasn't then until year two, full class sizes of 30 children, that it became much harder for him to keep up with the demands of the curriculum. And it was at the end of year two that we then started the dreaded EHCP process. My goodness me. So despite the timescales on the screen now, I think we have a record, we must be the record in the country, 54 weeks it took us to get approval for Sebastian's EHCP. And again, Corpal were absolutely integral with the support that they provided during that process, not just from being able to advise us through the process, but also making sure that we considered everything that we need to in Sebastian's best interests to make sure that that education health care plan was really robust in order to meet his learning and development needs. And after jumping through what seemed like millions of hoops, Sebastian now does have full highest level of funding and has a full-time one-to-one in place, and therefore I would urge you as quickly as you can, because of the time that the process takes, to try and get that in place. And I'm very, very happy as a volunteer for Corpal to help anybody during that process. Just keep fighting. I did. So last year, Sebastian also received a couple of additional diagnoses. One of ADHD, which for those of you that may not be aware is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and he also received a diagnosis for ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder. So my understanding, again from the research that I do, is that there's a high number of individuals that are affected by disorders of the corpus callosum that also receive an additional diagnosis of ADHD. and around 40% of children that are or individuals that are diagnosed with ADHD also receive a diagnosis of ODD, so your oppositional defiance disorder. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about those two conditions now, but if anybody wants to speak to me after the conference today, I will be hanging around and I'm more than happy to answer any questions about any of the content of the presentation today. Lastly, one of the things that I wanted to go through with you is we've obviously spent 9 years with Sebastian now sort of trialling a range of strategies and interventions to help him navigate his academic and social development. And on the screen now you can see some of the strategies that we found particularly helpful as a family, and I just wanted to share a little bit more information with you about each of these things, but again can take any questions on them if anybody has any. So the first one being the big body brain breaks and sensory circuits. So this is something that has been really benefited Sebastian. Just in terms of children with ACC have such a high cognitive overload, Sebastian isn't able to sit and concentrate as long as the individuals in his class, and therefore it's essential that he is given the opportunity when he feels that he's becoming restless, he can't concentrate, that he can leave the classroom, that he can go and have a big body break or complete one of his sensory circuits, which is going to enable him to return to the classroom and focus. We've actually had that written into his EHCP, so he is never denied the ability to leave the classroom when he needs to have a break and to return. One of the other things, particularly in the younger years, that Seb struggled a little bit with was transitions at school. So moving from one activity to the next, just the whole commotion of it, the anxiety of what's coming up next, where am I supposed to go, what am I doing, caused some challenges, to say the least, during those transitions. So one of the things that we built into his plan was like a now and next board, and it's simply an A4 sheet of paper that's got picture cards that show you what you're doing now, but what's coming up next. And that's been really really helped Sebastian transition successfully from one activity to the other whilst he's at school. Wobble cushions and kick bands have become his new best friend at school. You know, they'll go everywhere with him. So rather than potentially moving and wiggling in the chair and kicking tables which are going to distract the rest of the children, Sebastian's brain needs constant movement, and when you're in a class of 30 children, that's really difficult to manage, but there are things that can be put into place to help. So a wobble cushion is basically like an inflatable pillow that you can sit on, and it just enables you to wiggle and wobble around. And a kick band just goes in between the two legs of your chair, so that you can just kick against the kick band rather than kicking a table and distracting other children. And again, those really simple interventions and resources have really helped with Sebastian being able to cope in that classroom environment. So pre-teaching new concepts and repetition, again you would have heard individuals talking about the importance of that this morning. That's something that again forms a really big part of Sebastian's individual healthcare plan. One thing that his one-to-one does before any new subject is actually pre-teach a new concept to him, so that when it's introduced to the rest of the class, he's already got that feeling of success, that feeling of I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's going to help with you know, that confidence, being able to recap information. One thing that we have found with Sebastian though is that sometimes a skill that we think is really well embedded and really well learnt suddenly gets lost. And therefore one of the things that we have found that we consistently have to do is recap prior skills that have been learned. So in year 1 and 2, they were learning the 5 and the 10 times table. In year 4, they're learning the 8 and 9 times table. But Sebastian will still recap the 5s and the 10s and the 2s near enough every day to make sure that those skills aren't lost. Concrete resources, extra time and work in a quiet space, again due to the cognitive load and the processing speed of children with disorders of the corpus callosum. Extra time has to be given to enable tasks to be completed. And sometimes the hustle and bustle of a busy classroom can be really, really overstimulating for children with disorders of the corpus callosum. So Sebastian, again, as part of his healthcare plan, has a quiet space that he can go to outside of the classroom where there's minimal distraction, which is going to help him focus and concentrate. These are all things that part of his EHCPs, mandatory provision that school have to follow. Concrete resources, again, I know Karima mentioned that in her presentation as well, and those simplified instructions, that's just come up again in the careers presentation. You're hearing it consistently throughout, really, really important for individuals with DCC. We also heard a fantastic presentation earlier about that emotional literacy support, and again, that's something that we've had built in to Sebastian's EHCP, because that social development again has been quite challenging. But the ELSA support at school and Lego therapy have been two interventions that have been particularly useful for Sebastian. And that ties in with the one-to-one interventions and the need for those small group activities as well. And then lastly, they might be terms that some of you may not have heard of before, but sports casting and a circle of friends intervention are basically interventions to teach social skills and help develop friendships. And again, they form part of Sebastian's EHCP and have been absolutely integral to his social development. And finally, come and stand with me, because I just wanted to acknowledge how incredible this little man is. He is probably the most hardworking, determined little boy I've ever come across. He gives absolutely 100% at everything that he sets his mind at. And you've achieved, look at the screen, Sebastian, you've achieved the most amazing things. And Daddy and I are so incredibly proud of you. And I think you deserve a round of applause, which you think.